Let's bring in our legal panel here on America Right Now of the week. Thane Rosenbaum is a distinguished professor at Touro Law School, and Bill McGinley, principal of the Vogel Group, and he's also a former White House cabinet secretary. Okay, guys, Professor Rosenbaum, I'm going to go to you first. Your thoughts on the arguments that you heard yesterday and on the developments that have happened over the last couple of hours.
Well, Tom and Rob, look, yesterday was not a very good day for the House impeachment managers at all. What became clearly revealed was that they made a strategic mistake in pinning their fortunes to one charge, one single charge, an article of impeachment, incitement to insurrection. And when they did that, again, I never knew why they did. Bill and I have been saying for a month that that was a mistake because it forced them to be legally dependent on the president's January 6th speech. Everything was tied. All the marbles were right there. That was the ball game. The problem is the president used the words peacefully, patriotically, make your voices heard. That is the most exonerating sentence I could ever imagine in an incitement to insurrection. So instead, they spent the week providing evidence that did not match the elements of this crime. They produced all sorts of evidence that was related to maybe dereliction of duty or criminal or gross negligence or anything. I mean, this is just such a bizarre week because they simply ignored the one problem that they had, which was that incitement has a specific legal definition. And the speeches that the president gave in October have nothing to do with incitement at all. In fact, even what's happening today, I don't see, unless they produce a second article of impeachment, what any of these witnesses can add to this trial that would relate again to the single charge that the Democrats chose when they rushed this impeachment with one single charge of high crimes and misdemeanors connected entirely to incitement to insurrection.
Bill McGinley, look, the timeline doesn't line up. We just went through that with Ken Cuccinelli. And as the professor was just saying, that Brandenburg test that we were also talking about with Alan Dershowitz, that doesn't work here either. Doesn't this whole thing now just look like political theater? And do you believe that it could ultimately end up backfiring on the Democrats?
Yes to both of those questions. And to add to what Thane just said, number one, the entire record that the House managers relied on was primarily newspaper reports. There's a very specific reason why newspaper reports are not admissible in a court of law, is because you can't judge the credibility of anonymous sources. You can't, through the adversarial process, test the veracity of their statements. It's why you had Senator Lee stand up on the first day of the trial and object to some of the House managers' presentation by saying that that was a completely false statement that they contained in their arguments. Number two, when you get into the First Amendment realm, in many contexts, the courts have been quite clear that in order to judge somebody liable or to try and have them in criminal jeopardy, you have to rely upon the four corners of the words that they speak themselves.
That's right.
You can't get into the intent behind the speech because that's just impossible to divine. It's also unfair to hold a speaker liable because of the effect that their speech has in one context or another. And so when the House managers presented a case that was completely contextual, using newspaper reports and social media from people who were not the president to try and paint the picture that he was somehow responsible for this, I think they completely missed the mark. And yesterday you began to see the president's lawyers get their sea legs and punch holes in this by pointing out mistakes in their evidentiary record, which really isn't an evidentiary record. It was just a social media presentation. And also in some of the reporting that other news outlets had done, where you had people who were actually had personal knowledge sitting in the chamber who were willing to and able to object.
And let's be very clear. This is the first impeachment where there have been no hearings. There have been no witnesses. There have been no depositions. And in the manager's arguments, they didn't cite any case law. This was really not a legal argument. The Trump lawyers made a legal argument. And what you're seeing on your screen, folks, that is just outside of the Senate chamber. We do expect that they will be called back to order here momentarily. It was supposed to be 12:30. We've seen a number of senators head back into the chamber, and when the proceedings pick back up again, we will be taking it live. Rob?
Yeah, you got CNN right there talking to Joe Manchin. That could be an interesting vote. You don't know. I mean, it's like this is all very interesting. I mean, I'm sure the Democrats are probably all going to come together and vote guilty on this thing, but he's one of those more moderate, Democrats. It's in a vulnerable place. You're in West Virginia, where a lot of people still love Trump. He's got to play this thing a certain way. They're supposed to gavel in 2 minutes ago, so this is.
Professor Rosenbaum, I want to ask you about censure, because a lot of people are saying, hey, look, if we don't have witnesses, and they somehow claw this back, what they did this morning. And the Democrats, rushed into this idea of having witnesses, and there may be some buyer's remorse there, because it could be a real hornet's nest for them. That the idea that there could be a censure vote, or these votes associated with the 14th Amendment that would prevent the president from running for office, the former president from running for office again. Your thoughts on the viability of those?
Well, Tom, the censure has a problem, because censure for what, right? If they say he's being censured for an insurrection, well, he just got acquitted of the insurrection. Again, that's the problem. They have boxed themselves in. Similarly, the point that you're making, I know you're a lawyer, so you understand the 14th Amendment in Section 3 says that if you were engaged in insurrection, rebellion, or treason, you're disqualified for running from office. But the president would have then just been acquitted of the very thing that he's being charged. And remember, in our government, in our legal system, in the Constitution, double jeopardy applies. A person cannot be prosecuted and convicted for the same crime twice. So if you're going to censure him, you got to better find something else to censure him from. This is the problem, again, what I said before. They pin their hopes to incitement. And instead, the only evidence they showed with this endless looping of film only further indicted the rioters. It provided more evidence against them, but it provided no causal proximate connection between the president and them.
They seem to.
If they started with your point with the 14th Amendment, then they could have built an argument of an evolution of a rebellion.
Sure.
And it started this way and it ended this way. But so far, they can't just do this now.
Yeah, we just saw Mitt Romney is standing outside of the Senate chamber. He's speaking with reporters. Again, the senators are filing back in. They were supposed to gavel back in about 4 minutes ago. We don't. We don't have sound from that. But here he is going back into the chamber again. Senator Romney expected to vote for conviction. And again, as soon as we have this, the proceedings gavel in, we will take you to the floor of the Senate. But you're seeing all of the players, all of the jurors, the so-called jurors in this trial, heading back in. To your point, Professor, and Bill, I want to get you in here just for a quick second on the censure issue, because there's been a lot of talk that they're going to try and figure out some middle ground here, but that doesn't seem to hold water legally either. This whole thing could just end with a big thud.
And I think that's one of the biggest political mistakes the Democrats did this morning, is by trying to open up Pandora's box with the witnesses. They may have closed the door politically to censure, which may have been an option if they just stuck to the four corners of the skinny impeachment trial that they were trying to conduct. The other thing to remember as we go into this afternoon's proceedings after this morning's chaos, that was just a gatekeeper motion that the Senate voted on. The sole question before the Senate was, should we entertain motions to take testimony or seek documents? 5 Republicans crossed over and joined the Democrats and said yes. But now what the caucuses are probably doing is trying to negotiate what are going to be the motions for specific testimony and documents that are going to be presented to the Senate to decide whether they're going to form a subcommittee to go ahead and go back and take this discovery. Because remember, this has historically been assigned to a subcommittee that goes ahead and takes the depositions, takes the documents, produces a report that includes the raw evidence, and then resubmits it to the Senate for acceptance into the factual record for the trial. And so there is a way out for the Democrats if they decide to reject the specific motions for testimony and documents as a way to get out, and they can just say that they didn't make the evidentiary predicate for us to be able to vote yes after we gave them an opportunity to move forward with these specific motions.
All right, and you're seeing there Senator Leahy of Vermont. He is back in the president's chair, and the clerks are all seated. As I mentioned, the members of the Senate are filing onto the floor, and it will be, and we will perhaps have a reconvening here in just a few moments. And the next vote here is going to be particularly critical, because if the Democrats are going to try and claw this back, or they're going to set certain standards for these witnesses and timetables for these depositions and these witnesses, that would happen at this point. Professor, you know, how long could this take? At this, if they decide that they want to proceed with witnesses, well, let me ask you this question. One of the Trump attorneys this morning said, if we're going to do this, you're also going to do depositions in person. It's not going to be via Zoom. We're not going to be cutesy about this. We're going to do this the way that it should be done. The Senate is meeting in person. We're going to do the depositions in person. We're going to question these witnesses in person. Do they have the ability to force that in some fashion?
Probably not, okay? But Bill is right, what he just said. They've now opened the door, right? Once you decide, again, this is so twisted, like you're asking for now, all of a sudden, you waited an entire month, and now only at the very end, when we're supposed to sum up the arguments, do you want to hear from someone? For procedural due process, the president's attorneys have the right to now seek as much testimony as possible. I don't know whether they can compel them to come to Philadelphia, but in fundamental fairness, this is an American courtroom. The president, his attorney, has the right to seek his own witnesses, regardless of how many there are. And remember, Tom and Rob, this is one of those, yes, it's a political trial. It's not a legal trial. We know that. But we already have jurors who are made up of the victims. We're about to now have jurors who are both victims and witnesses. I mean, anyone who's watched Law and Order and thinks that's how the legal system works is going to be very confused to watch the jurors playing all of these various roles. And that's what essentially the door was open for today. And the House could have started this process a month ago. But remember, you know, your parents always said, you know, don't act rationally, think before you act. And I think the House made a huge mistake in not slowing down the process, doing an investigation, taking testimony, and then charging the president with the elements that you actually can prove, instead of just showing them like binge watching Netflix movies of a horrible attack against the president without an actual connection to the president under an incitement to a violence charge.
And we do have a new report coming in that Senator Mike Lee has given his phone records from January 6th to the House managers, and we're not exactly sure what that has to do with, whether that was compelled, whether it was requested, why he has done that, and we're hearing that it shows that the Trump call that has been a topic of conversation today came before the Pence tweet. So it goes to this issue of the timeline, and I'm sure we're going to be talking more about that. Rob, I want to go to you, though, as we're waiting for the Senate to reconvene here, which we do expect will happen any moment now. I think the American people look at this, Rob, and they say, this is a complete mess.
Yeah, it definitely is that. I'm trying to line up what you're saying here with the Trump call versus the Pence tweet, and what I think Mike Lee was there with McCarthy, right? Is that what I think that's what they were initially saying, that maybe Lee got the call and gave it to McCarthy?
I think it was with Tuberville.
It was Tuberville. Okay, it was the other one. It was the Tuberville. Okay, got it. Okay, so we're going to see what happens with that. Obviously, that's a big element there. Why he gave those phone records over? Was he compelled? Is that something that might help the president? It could be that too.
What we are hearing, and we're just learning, Rob, is that it does contradict what the House managers have put into the record about the timeline. And this is we've been talking about this with Ken Cuccinelli and with our other experts this morning. That not only does this article of impeachment fail from a legal standpoint, it just also from the factual record, the Democrats' case also seems to be unraveling here. having witnesses is going to make it come apart even further. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but wanted to make that clarification, Rob.
No, yeah, I mean, we're watching this thing. I mean, they're going to reconvene here. I'm so excited to see what they've come up with because, you know, like you said, I don't know that Democrats really want to go down this road. And I really don't know if the administration wants them to go down this road. I mean, we watched all week as Biden got questioned about this. I mean, their answers were always so, I mean, you could tell they don't like this. They don't like the attention being taken away. They're trying to start off this administration on the right foot. They're not doing a great job so far, if we can be honest about it. They've had a lot of missteps. And, you know, I just think that this is polarizing for a president that said he wanted to come in and kind of get everybody to coalesce. I mean, nobody likes the atmosphere in this country right now. I mean, this country is embarrassing right now. I mean, we're so divided. Everything's so political. It's just a mess. And this procedure is messy. And I can understand Democrats. They're mad. That day was terrible. I think they made a snap decision to impeach based on emotion and based on what they thought they knew about a situation. But at the end of the day, I mean, they needed to look in their own backyard first before they made this decision because, like we've shown, I mean, politicians give speeches. Politicians say fight like hell. President Trump was angry about the results of the election, and perhaps he took the allegations of what happened in that election too far. But we have gone over on this network a number of legitimate claims that made this election unfair. It was not a fair election. I mean, you had all the forces of this country, from big tech to the media, all coming together to say we need to get rid of Donald Trump, and they all worked with the DNC to make it happen, to protect Joe Biden in every possible way that they could and get Trump out of office. And that is so alienating to 74 million people. And now to add insult to injury, after what was an unfair election, they're going to go and they're going to try and impeach him so he can never come back. And it's just going to tick a lot of people off. And if this drags on for another week, I think it's really bad politics. I think this should end today.
All right, so look, I want to ask you, Professor, a question that I think is on the minds of a lot of people. We've now been through 2 of these things over the last year. It's very clear that Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats started thinking about how to impeach Donald Trump in 2016. And we've now been through this twice. The articles and the process the first time and the case that was presented the first time fell flat. This seems to be even worse since it was done as sort of a drive-by impeachment. The Democrats here are weaponizing the Constitution against the president, and this is going to fall flat as well. Is there anything from the standpoint of either from the law or from the House rules that could be done to these managers, to the Speaker herself, for encouraging this type of behavior because of the amount of time that we have wasted here, because of the fact that they've really turned Washington upside down in what is it's not about security and it's not about the law, it's about their political agenda.
Tom, we need like a national conversation about what we think impeachment is for. The founding fathers must be shocked by this. They thought the impeachment process would be an extraordinary remedy, a shock to the national soul, not the sort of thing you should be inured to, desensitized to. We're getting to the point where we're now going to have an expectation that everyone who gets elected should at least deserve one impeachment. And so we really have to ask this question. Do we want to go back to what the original founders of our nation thought about and said that this is not for how you weaponize the Constitution to destroy your political enemies, but something that you really have to really consider, not just politically, but morally and legally. Do we want to put the nation through this? And I think that, look, the voters for many of the House impeachment managers should think about this. Was I represented properly by my congressperson by putting us through this again?
Yeah. Bill, look, the Washington Post, 17 minutes into the Trump administration, on January 20th, 2017, had this headline: "The campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." All of this behavior, has real damage been done here over these last 4 years by the way that the Democrats, colluding with the press, the left-wing media, big tech, all of these factors so focused on trying to get to make Donald Trump pay for winning the 2016 election. Have they done damage to this country, to the faith in our institutions? Your thoughts on this before the Senate gavels back in, which we expect will happen at any moment?
Sure. No, I think, look, the short answer to that is yes. One of the things that we keep seeing throughout the Trump presidency, and now after his first term concluded, is that the Democrats keep setting precedents that once the shift in power happens in Washington back to the Republicans, could be used against their party. Equal justice under law means that it should be regardless of which party is in power and which party is in the minority, that the standards, the procedures, the burdens of proof, and the evidentiary rules should be applied objectively, so that due process is preserved, that we don't put somebody through a political trial or even a legal trial unless they have a meaningful opportunity to be heard, to cross-examine and confront their accusers, so that they have an opportunity to present their case as to why this procedure should not go forward. That was not given to former President Trump. Not one hearing was held. And if you go back and you look at the history of House impeachment, especially against presidents, there is basically three standard phases. There's the resolution phase, where the House as a whole adopts the resolution to assign the impeachment inquiry to a committee. The committee then conducts the investigatory phase, where they get documents, they talk to witnesses, they depose them, and then they basically produce the report to the full House for the impeachment vote itself. That whole process produces an evidentiary record filled with the documents and testimony that is then submitted to the Senate, and that can be accepted, and gives the counsel for both sides an opportunity to argue over that evidentiary record. We don't have an evidentiary record in this proceeding. The House managers are relying upon the emotional and the reaction, and justifiably how upset everybody is about what happened on January 6th, but they're trying to use it as a political infomercial to inflict damage on the Republican Party and former President Trump. By opening the door to witnesses and documents potentially in the Senate, they are now risking taking what was a pretty good political infomercial that they stitched together over the last couple of days and curling it headlong into a legal process that's only going to get very, very messy.
Okay, Bill McGinley and Professor Thane Rosenbaum, stay with us. We are going to take you to the Senate floor. They are reconvening the impeachment trial of former President Trump. Let's listen in.
Mr. Castor, I'm sorry. May I be recognized? Yes, you are. You are recognized.
Senators,
Glasses all fogged up.
Donald John Trump, by his counsel, is prepared to stipulate that if Representative Herrera Butler part of these proceedings, her testimony would be consistent with the statement she issued on February 12, 2021, and the former president's counsel is agreeable to the admission of that public statement into evidence at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Castor. Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. President. The managers are prepared to enter into the agreement. I will now read the statement. This is the statement of Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, February 12, 2021. In my January 12th statement in support of the article of impeachment, I referenced a conversation House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy relayed to me that he'd had with President Trump while the January 6th attack was ongoing. Here are the details. When McCarthy finally reached the president on January 6th and asked him to publicly and forcefully call off the riot, the president initially repeated the falsehood that it was Antifa that had breached the Capitol. McCarthy refuted that and told the president that these were Trump supporters. That's when, according to McCarthy, the president said, "Well, Kevin, I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are." Since I publicly announced my decision to vote for impeachment, I have shared these details in countless conversations with constituents and colleagues, and multiple times through the media and other public forums. I told it to the Daily News of Longview on January 17th. I've shared it with local county Republican executive board members, as well as other constituents who asked me to explain my vote. I shared it with thousands of residents on my telephone town hall on February 8th. Mr. President, I now move that the Senate admit the statement into evidence.
Objection, and without objection, the statement will be admitted into evidence. And does either party wish to make any further motions related to witnesses or documents at this time?
Mr. President, the President's counsel have no further motions.
Discussion.
And Mr. President, we have no further motions either.
Excuse me, then the chair would note that neither party wishes to make further motions under Section 6 of Senate Resolution 47. Therefore, the next question is on admission of the evidence submitted by both parties pursuant to Section 8 of the resolution. The majority leaders recommend.
So now, as we move to another matter, I'm advised that the House managers have no objection to the admission of evidence proposed to be admitted by the former President's counsel under the provisions of Section 8 of Senate Resolution 47, and that the President's counsel have no objections to the evidence proposed to be admitted into evidence by the House managers. Pursuant to Section 8 of the resolution, as agreed to by Leader McConnell and myself a few days ago, both parties have made timely filings of this evidence with the Secretary of the Senate and have provided copies to each other. I therefore ask unanimous consent that the Senate dispense with the provisions of Section 8A of Senate Resolution 47 and that the materials submitted by both parties be admitted into evidence subject to the provisions of Section 8C of that resolution, which provides that the admission of this evidence does not constitute a concession by either party as to the truth of the matters asserted by the other party, and that each senator shall decide for him or herself the weight to be given such evidence. This request has the approval of both parties and the Republican leader.
Without objection, is so ordered. Okay, then pursuant to the provision, the Senate has provided for up to 4 hours of closing arguments. They'll be equally divided between the managers on the part of the House of Representatives and the counsel for the former president. And pursuant to Rule 22 of the Rules of Procedure and Practice in the Senate, when sitting on impeachment trials, the argument shall be open and closed on the part of the House of Representatives. So the chair recognizes Mr. Manager Raskin to begin the presentation on the part of the House of Representatives. Mr. Raskin, under Rule 22, you may reserve time if you wish.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, before I proceed, it was suggested by defense counsel that Donald Trump's conduct during the attack, as described in Congresswoman Butler's statement, is somehow not part of the constitutional offense for which former President Trump has been charged. I want to reject that falsehood and that fallacy immediately. After he knew that violence was underway at the Capitol, President Trump took actions that further incited the insurgents to be more inflamed and to take even more extreme, selective, and focused action against Vice President Mike Pence. Former President Trump also, as described by Congresswoman Butler's notes, refused requests to publicly, immediately, and forcefully call off the riots. And when he was told that the insurgents inside the Capitol were Trump supporters, the president said, quote, "Well, Kevin, I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are." Think about that for a second. This uncontradicted statement that has just been stipulated as part of the evidentiary record. The president said, well, Kevin, I guess these people, meaning the mobsters, the insurrectionists, are more upset about the election than you are. That conduct is obviously part and parcel of the constitutional offense that he was incitement to insurrection. That is continuing incitement to the insurrection. The conduct described not only perpetuated his continuing offense, but also provides to us here today further decisive evidence of his intent to incite the insurrection in the first place. When my opposing counsel says that you should ignore the president's actions after the insurrection began, that is plainly wrong. And it, of course, reflects the fact that they have no defense to his outrageous, scandalous, and unconstitutional conduct in the middle of a violent assault on the Capitol that he incited. Senators, think about it for a second. Say you light a fire, and you're charged with arson. And the defense counsel says, everything that I did after the fire started is irrelevant. And the court would reject that immediately and say, that's not true at all. It's extremely relevant to whether or not you committed the crime. If you run over and try to put out the flames, if you get lots of water and say, help, help, there's a fire, if you call for help, a court will could infer that you didn't intend for the fire to be lit in the first place. They would accept your defense, perhaps, that it was all an accident. It was an all accident. Accidents happen with fire. But if, on the other hand, when the fire erupts, you go and you pour more fuel on it, you stand by and you watch it gleefully, any reasonable person will infer that you not only intended the fire to start, but that once it got started and began to spread, you intended to continue to keep the fire going. And that's exactly where we are, my friends. Of course your conduct while a crime is ongoing is relevant to your culpability, both to the continuation of the offense, but also directly relevant, directly illuminating to what your purpose was originally. What was your intent? And any court in the land would laugh out of court any criminal defendant who said, what I did after I allegedly killed that person is irrelevant to whether or not I intended to kill them. I mean, come on. Donald Trump's refusal not only to send help, but also to continue to further incite the insurgents against his own vice president, provides further decisive evidence of both his intent to start this violent insurrection and his continued incitement once the attack had begun to override the Capitol. All right. Senators, that was in response to this new evidentiary particle that came in. But in my closing, I want to thank you for your remarkable attention and your seriousness of purpose befitting your office. We've offered you overwhelming and irrefutable and certainly unrefuted evidence that former President Trump incited this insurrection against us. To quote the statement Representative Liz Cheney made in January, quote, on January 6, 2021, a violent mob attacked the United States Capitol to obstruct the process of our democracy and stop the counting of presidential electoral votes. This insurrection caused injury, death, and destruction in the most sacred space in our republic. She continued. Representative Cheney continued. Much more will become clear in coming days and weeks, but what we know now is enough. The President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled this mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the president. The president could have immediately and forcefully intervened to stop the violence. He did not. There has never been a greater betrayal by the President of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. I will vote to impeach the president. Representative Cheney was right. She based her vote on the facts, on the evidence, and on the Constitution. And the evidence The video, documentary, eyewitness has only grown stronger and stronger and more detailed right up till today, right up to 10 minutes ago, over the course of this Senate trial. And I have no doubt that you all noticed that despite the various propaganda reels and so on, President Trump's lawyers have said almost nothing to contest or overcome the actual evidence of former President Trump's conduct that we presented, much less have they brought their client forward to tell us his side of the story. We sent him a letter last week, which they rejected out of hand. The former President of the United States refused to come and tell us, and I ask any of you, if you were charged with inciting violent insurrection against our country, and you were falsely accused, would you come and testify? I know I would. I'd be there at 7 o'clock in the morning waiting for the doors to open. I'm sure that's true of 100 senators in this room. I hope it's true of 100 senators in this room. Senate was lectured several times yesterday about cancel culture. Well, not even 2 weeks ago, the president's most reliable supporters in the House, I'm sorry, not the president, the former president's most reliable supporters in the House tried to cancel out Representative Cheney because of her courageous and patriotic defense of the Republic and the truth and the Constitution. They tried to strip her of her leading role as chair of the House Republican Conference. But you know what? I hope everybody takes a second to reflect on this. The conference rejected this plainly retaliatory and cowardly attempt to punish her for telling the truth to her constituents and her country and voting for impeachment. Who says you can't stand up against bullies? Who says? In my mind, Liz Cheney is a hero for standing up for the truth and resisting this retaliatory cancel culture that she was subjected to. But she beat them on a vote of 145 to 61, more than 2-to-1 vote. You know, Ben Franklin, a great champion of Enlightenment, an enemy of political fanaticism and cowardice, and of course another great Philadelphian, once wrote this: "I have observed that wrong is always growing more wrong until there is no bearing it anymore, and that right, however opposed, comes right at last." Comes right at last. Think about that. This is America, home of the brave, land of the free. The America of Ben Franklin, who said, "If you make yourself a sheep, the wolves will eat you." Don't make yourself a sheep. The wolves will eat you. The America of Thomas Jefferson, who said at another difficult moment, "A little patience and we shall see the reign of witches pass over, their spirits dissolve, and the people, recovering their true sight, restore their government to its true principles." The America of Tom Paine, who said, "The mind, once enlightened, cannot again become dark." Now, we showed you hour after hour of real-time evidence demonstrating every step of Donald Trump's constitutional crime. We showed you how he indoctrinated the mob with his Orwellian propaganda about how the election he lost by more than 7 million votes and 306 to 232 in the electoral college, which he had described as a landslide when he won by the exact same margin in 2016, was actually a landslide victory for him being stolen away by a bipartisan conspiracy and fraud and corruption. We showed you how 61 courts and 88 judges, federal, state, local, trial, appellate, from the lowest courts in the land to the United States Supreme Court across the street, and 8 federal judges he himself named to the bench, all found no basis in fact or law for his outlandish and deranged inventions and concoctions about the election. In the meantime, President Trump tried to bully state-level officials to commit a fraud on the public by literally finding votes. We examined the case study of Georgia, where he called to threaten Republican Brad Raffensperger to find him 11,780 votes. That's all he wanted, he said. 11,780 votes. Don't we all? 11,780 votes. That's all he wanted to nullify Biden's victory and to win the election. Raffensperger ended up with savage death threats against him and his family, telling him he deserved a firing squad. Another election official urged Trump to cut it out or people would get hurt and killed. A prescient warning indeed. Raffensperger ended up saying that he and his family supported Donald Trump, gave him money, and now Trump threw us under the bus. We saw what happened in Lansing, Michigan, with the extremist mob he cultivated, which led to 2 shocking Capitol sieges and a criminal conspiracy by extremists to kidnap and likely assassinate Governor Whitmer. We saw him trying to get state legislatures to disavow and overthrow their popular election results and replace them with Trump electors. We showed you the process of summoning the mob, reaching out, urging people to come. As we celebrate President's Day on Monday, imagine, is there another president in our history who would urge supporters to come to Washington for a wild time? You saw how he embraced violent extremist elements like the Proud Boys, who were told in a nationally televised presidential candidate debate to stand back and stand by, which became their official slogan as they converged on Washington with other extremist and seditious groups and competed to be the lead stormtroopers of the attack on this building. You saw the assembly of the mob on January 6th, and how beautiful that angry mob must have looked to Donald Trump as he peered down from the lectern with the seal of the President of the United States of America emblazoned on it. That crowd was filled with extremists in tactical gear, armed to the teeth and ready to fight, and other brawling MAGA supporters. All of them saying, "Stop the steal right now." And he said he was going to march with them to the Capitol, even though the permit for the rally specifically forbade a march. But he said he would march with them, giving them more comfort that what they were doing was legitimate. It was okay. But of course, he stayed back, as he presumably didn't want to be too close to the action at the Capitol, as the lawyers called it. Not an insurrection, they urged us yesterday. It's an action. He didn't want to be too close to the action when all hell was about to break loose. Now, incitement, as we've discussed, requires an inherently fact-based evidentiary inquiry. And this is what we did. We gave you many hours of specific factual details about, to use Congresswoman Cheney's words, how the president summoned the mob, assembled the mob, incited it, lit the match, sending them off to the Capitol, where they thought, as they yelled out, that they'd been invited by the President of the United States. And then, of course, they unleashed unparalleled violence against our overwhelmed and besieged but heroic police officers, who you thoughtfully honored yesterday when the officers got in their way as they entered the Capitol at the behest of the President of the United States to stop the steal. Now, I'm convinced most senators must be convinced by this overwhelming and specific detail, because most Americans are. But say you still have your doubts. You think the president really thought that he was sending his followers to participate in a peaceful, nonviolent rally, the kind that might have been organized by Julian Bond, who my distinguished opposing counsel brought up, Ella Baker, Bob Moses, our late beloved colleague John Lewis, for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Maybe the president really thought this was going to be like the March on Washington organized by Bayard Rustin and Dr. Martin Luther King, who said nonviolence is the answer to the crucial moral and political questions of our time. So let's say you're still flirting with the idea that Donald Trump's conduct was totally appropriate, as he proclaimed right off the bat, and he's the innocent victim of a mass accident or a catastrophe like a fire or a flood, as we were invited to frame it on our opening day by distinguished co-counsel or opposing counsel. And you think maybe we're just looking for somebody to blame for this nightmare and catastrophe that has befallen the Republic. We're just looking for someone to blame. Well, here's the key question then in resolving your doubts, if you're in that category. How did Donald Trump react when he learned of the violent storming of the Capitol and the threats to senators, members of the House, and his own vice president, as well as the images he saw on TV of the pummeling and beating and harassment of our police officers? Did he spring into action to stop the violence and save us? Did he even wonder about his own security, since an out-of-control anti-government mob could come after him too? Did he quickly try to get in touch with or denounce the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the rally organizers, the Save America rally organizers, and everyone on the extreme right, to tell them that this was not what he had in mind? It was a big mistake. Call it off, call it off, call it off, as Representative Gallagher begged him to do on national television? No. He delighted in it. He reveled in it. He exulted in it. He could not understand why the people around him did not share his delight. And then a long period of silence ensued while the mob beat the daylights out of police officers and invaded this building, as you saw in security footage, and proceeded to hunt down Vice President Mike Pence as a traitor and denounced and cursed Speaker Pelosi, both of whom you heard mob members say they wanted to kill. They were both in real danger. And our government could, without the heroism of our officers and the bravery and courage of a lot of people in this room. Here's what Republican Representative Anthony Gonzalez of Ohio said. He's a former pro football player. We are imploring the president to help, to stand up, to help defend the United States Capitol and the United States Congress, which is under attack. We are begging, essentially, and he was nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. And as I've emphasized this morning, that dereliction of duty, that desertion of duty was central to his incitement of insurrection and inextricable from it. Inextricable. Bound together. It reveals his state of mind that day, what he was thinking as he provoked the mob to violence and further violence. It shows how he perpetuated his continuing offense on January 6th, his course of conduct charged in the article of impeachment, as he further incited the mob during the attack, aiming it at Vice President Mike Pence himself, while failing to quell it in either of his roles as Commander-in-Chief or his real role that day, Inciter-in-Chief. And it powerfully demonstrates that the ex-president knew, of course, that violence was foreseeable, that it was predictable and predicted. That day, since he was not surprised and not horrified, no, he was delighted. And through his acts of omission and commission that day, he abused his office by siding with the insurrectionists at almost every point, rather than with the Congress of the United States, rather than with the Constitution. In just a moment, my colleague, Mr. Cicilline, will address President Trump's conduct, his actions and inactions, his culpable state of mind during the attack, as he will establish yesterday's explosive revelations about House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's desperate call to Trump and Trump's truly astounding reaction confirm that Trump was doing nothing to help the people in this room, beyond doubt that Trump supported the actions of the mob. And so he must be convicted. It's that simple. When he took the stage on January 6th, he knew exactly how combustible the situation was. He knew there were many people in the crowd who were ready to jump into action, to engage in violence at any signal that he needed them to fight like hell to stop the steal. And that's exactly what he told them to do. Then he aimed them straight here, right down Pennsylvania at the Capitol, where he told them that the steal was occurring, that is, the counting of the Electoral College votes. And we all know what happened next. They attacked this building. They disrupted the peaceful transfer of power. They injured and killed people, convinced that they were acting on his instructions and with his approval and protection. And while that happened, he further incited them while failing to defend us. If that's not ground for conviction, if that's not a high crime and misdemeanor against the Republic in the United States of America, then nothing is. President Trump must be convicted for the safety and security of our democracy and our people. Mr. Cicilline.